So if you have a propane tank and you want to know if you can melt down silver, I'm going to show you how you can for very cheap. So here's my propane tank, and I have this little attachment where you can connect to a 5-gallon, I guess. And then, I mean, you can get the little torch attachment that you put on the adapter hose, and the torch attachment you can use like any torch attachment. I just got the cheapest one on Amazon. I think this was like 10 or 15 bucks. And the hose I think was around the same price. And then in another video I talked about how you can take a cinder block and you buy some of this refractory stone wool. I don't remember what it's called. This material, you don't want to really touch it with your hands. I mean, I have pretty thick, coarse hands, and so it doesn't really poke me, but I've heard that if you have soft hands, you can get little filaments of this stone-like splinters embedded in your skin. So consider wearing like rubber gloves when you're touching it, but I haven't had a problem, so. You still don't want to really go around it unless you're wearing a respirator if you're moving it around. But I'm not touching it right now, so I'm not worried about it. But once I start using my propane torch, I'm going to be putting my respirator on just in case little pieces of filament get vaporized. I don't want those getting stuck in my lungs for the next 100 years. You can get one of these little Crucible and Crucible holders. Also got this on Amazon. I think it was like 10 bucks or something. And you'll want to put your silver in there. You'll notice, you'll see a little bit of what looks like a weird glass forming on there and some traces of silver. So I wouldn't recommend mixing your crucibles. So I like to use boric acid. Boric acid acts as a really good powdered ceramic. And what ends up happening when you superheat it, it kind of forms a glass layer that excludes chemically silver. So it almost acts like, if you've ever tried mixing oil and water, how oil doesn't mix with water, that will make the silver not stick to the crucible, because this is like a carbon ceramic, and the silver will stick to the carbon ceramic if you don't put something that excludes silver. And I don't know the exact chemistry behind it. I just know that boric acid, when it forms a glass, that glass excludes liquefied silver, and it kind of looks like mercury kind of beating and rolling around. Also, I got these little these frames, and that's just for putting your Delft clay in, so you can make your molds. And I think these trays were pretty cheap. I don't remember how much they cost, 20 bucks probably. I like to use titanium dioxide as my anti-stick agent, so to speak. When I fill these with clay, I'll take whatever I'm molding and I'll kind of cover it in this white powder, this titanium dioxide, just to keep the clay from sticking to the mold. That way it pulls apart without damaging the mold. You're also going to want some copper tongs. And basically you end up forming a galvanic cell, which just basically means in chemical words that you're going to have a sacrificial metal no matter what you're doing, especially at high temperature. And so in this case, the sacrificial metal is going to be the copper. And also what's going to happen if you have any silver ions in solution or copper ions in solution, when I put a metal in there that's going to oxidize, whatever metal ions are in there, as long as it's something like silver, which is what I'm using, you're going to be fine. And then when you put copper in there, it's not going to cause copper to plate onto your ring. It's just going to cause any silver that dissolves in your solution to redeposit back onto your ring. And so basically it'll allow you to get like a perfect, if you're not using pure silver, you'll end up getting a pure silver plated layer on top of the less than pure silver. I only use fine silver, so all my silver is 99.999 whatever percent pure, because I just use the silver round bullion coins for my silver. So it doesn't really matter so much. You just want to be careful not to use anything like iron, just because of the potential of iron. You're going to end up causing the other materials to end up plating onto your ring. Like for example, you might actually electrolytically plate your ring with copper or whatever's in the solution. But strangely enough, if you use copper tongs, that doesn't happen as long as you don't put anything in there that'll cause that to happen. But again, this container right here is actually just has regular water in it, so it's not really going to matter. So that's not the case. But if you were using like an acid solution, like you can use like dilute sulfuric acid or partially, what's the word? Neutralized sulfuric acid. Anyway, you're also going to want some gloves that will put up with the high temperatures of what you're doing. So yes, I'm going to be holding a blowtorch and the heat's going to be headed away from me. But as this compartment, and I like having a small chamber, by the way, because then I can concentrate more heat in here. Since I'm using propane, my temperature is not as high as other fuels. And so I need to trap that heat so that I can get a really high temperature, because not only do I have to melt the silver, but I have to overheat it by at least 100 degrees or so that as I'm pouring it into my mold, it flows into my mold evenly without hardening early. And I've had that happen where I just barely melted it. You kind of roll it around and it looks like it's completely liquefied, and then you pour it in your mold, and sure enough, it doesn't fill out your mold, and then you ruin your cast. So it's just very important to get it really hot. And I kind of know because the outside of my gloves actually start smoking just from the radiant heat. So I'll be heating my thing, and then my hand's way back here, and I'll actually see smoke coming off of my gloves once I hit the temperature that I need. So I don't know what that temperature is, but I think it's about 100 or 200 degrees hotter than is required to get the silver to be molten. And I just want to make sure the silver stays molten and, you know, low viscosity until it fills the mold. And like I said, the viscosity increases exponentially as it approaches the temperature at which silver solidifies, as you can probably imagine, because it's a metal. So, and then as you're trying to do this, and as you fail multiple times and try to figure out why you're failing, those things become very obvious to you. So if you're watching this and you've melted silver before with a propane torch, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you might have been convinced to use MAP gas or some other material that burns at a higher temperature. And you can do that if you want to waste your money, no offense. But it only cost me like $20 to fill up this giant tank of propane, and in this setup I can easily get the temperatures to keep that silver liquid for, you know, a good 30 seconds after I finish torching it, after I finish heating it up. So that's what works for me. Do whatever works for you. I say all my materials. I think that's all the materials. I also use some, I don't remember what it's called. I also mix some of this. And I remember looking it up, and it's similar to sulfuric acid, but it's not sulfuric acid. It's partially neutralized, where it's sodium bisulfite. Sodium bisulfate, that's what it's called, sodium bisulfate. So you can look up sodium bisulfate, or you can just buy this stuff. This is also sodium bisulfate. And you just pour a bunch into a canister. You don't want to use anything that's iron or glass or steel or anything like that. You want to make sure you have it in glass. And you can see this has a slight blue hue to it, and that's because there are some dissolved copper ions in here, which gives it that blue hue. And this makes sure that if I dip silver into here, it's going to preferentially dissolve copper, and if there's any silver in here, the silver will take the place of the copper ions. So it basically forms a simple galvanic cell that electrolytically replaces any copper, any other metal impurities in your silver that you're forging, and purifies at least the outside layer of it to make sure that it's 100% pure silver. So even if you have 99.99% silver, this will make it 100%. This will preferentially galvanically attack anything that's not silver and replace it with silver. So it's a kind of a fun little trick, I guess. I think that's all the materials I use. So hope that helps you.